war. And part of that subtext, that is what they don't say, a definition of what constitutes civilization, is that ability to project military force. The Crusades are the first projection of military force by a united Europe against the Muslim world, among others. So, and again, since some Crusades were against fellow Christians as well as pagans. Technically, again, from the point of view of, who's saying this, but I'll grant that it's true. Technically, Muslims started when they attacked Christian pilgrims coming in Jerusalem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They stopped because of loss of income, but the damage was done. That is, we're not getting money from the tourists if we're attacking the tourists, so maybe we should leave the tourists alone. The damage was done. We're at war. So, pagan, from the dictionary. Someone who does not follow one of the world's main religions. Who decides if it's a main religion? Especially someone who is not a Christian, Muslim, or a Jew, whose religion is regarded as questionable, sometimes considered offensive, that term, pagan. A follower of an ancient polytheistic or pantheistic religion. So pan means across, poly means many. Someone who has no religion, believing in or relating to a religion that is not one of the world's main religion and is regarded as questionable. So, for example, the Romans and the Greeks were polytheistic. They were technically pagan by this definition. And the Abrahamic religions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are considered the world's main religion by this definition. So deconstructed. Okay? Ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, ancient nation of Israel, ancient Egyptians, ancient Babylonians, ancient everybody, they were polytheistic. In the sense that, okay, we might say that all the deities are one deity, but we're basically acknowledging that there are differences that lead up to a larger unity. So that it could include, as far as pagan from the point of view of the Abrahamic religions, current Hindus, current Buddhists, current Wiccans, current Ifu, Vodun, Santeria, or those considered pagan. Sometimes Native American spirituality could be considered within this framework. What happens then is, if we are retelling that we're a Christian nation, even though the founding fathers said nothing of the kind. Congress shall not make no rules establishing religion. They did that for a reason, and that reason was what was happening in the Crusades and in England. And we'll see that in terms of what happens with the Inquisition. Okay? The implication being, if you do not practice the Abrahamic religion, you have no religion. Okay? And having a religion is seen as a mark of civilization. That's also another part of that definition. All right? The responsibility of the civilized, therefore, is to bring civilization, in other words, real monotheistic Abrahamic religions, to the non-religious. Now remember, Yeshua came. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, weren't the founding fathers deists or something like that? Like deism, the whole Masons, the logic, everything can be explained through in-depth critical thinking.
Some of them were, yes.
A clockwork style God.
Some of them were, yes.
Okay.
Not all of them. I mean, there's a potpourri, so to speak, of different beliefs.
Okay. Yeah. I just
because remember, what is considered classical training, right? So from their point of view, classical training, according to Western civilization at that point, is the Greeks and the Romans. And what comes out during the Renaissance? People like René Descartes, all right? I think, therefore I am. I'm a rational being, therefore I'm a civilized being. Right? You can't show me God. Show me God. Burning bush? Okay, well, maybe we'll believe that that's what they believe, but show me what is rational. So the responsibility of the civilized is to bring civilization, in other words, the real monotheistic Abrahamic religion, to the quote-unquote non-religious. So there are some interesting bifurcations or inconsistencies. So, for example, the Black Madonna, worshipped throughout all Europe. There are some people who will say this is an archetypal metaphor rather than a reality reflecting that Mary and Yeshua were black Africans. Okay? The notion comes about to reconquer the Holy Land in the name of Christianity. And thus were born the Crusades. So, the many languages of Christianity. So, the Aramaic, the Peshitta, hieroglyphic languages, including the Demotic script, which becomes Coptic, which is basically a one-on-one translation of the Greek letters, matching them with characteristic hieroglyphic text. Amharic, and also Coptic, so Ethiopia. Latin, i.e. Roman Catholic. And then thence into German, Italian, French, and English. First Bible, so to speak, printed in Europe, which is different from the Peshitta's, the Gutenberg Bible. And then the King James Version in archaic English, Shakespearean era English. And then, say, your Revised Standard Version, modern English. Okay, so part of doing this language comparison is, okay, if you compare, as I've done on occasion with lines from the Peshitta and from Aramaic to Revised Standard, is not just simply the language changes that cause the changes that we see in our modern world. It's also some concepts do not translate, and other concepts are made more possible in terms of conquest. So the Spanish Inquisition, roughly 1478 to 1834. Inquisitions were used during the decline of the Roman Empire until the Spanish Inquisition's decline in the early 1800s. It can be run by both civil and church authorities in order to root out non-believers from a nation or a religion. So the civil authority, it's easy to see that the church authorities would want to root out non-believers, but why do the civil leaders want to root out non-believers? Well, there's an alliance here. This is a problem. This is what leads to our American separation of church and state. The Inquisition was one of the reasons why we are so adamant here in America about separating church and state. Bad things happen when the government is your religion and the government basically decides, we don't like you. Even if you're the majority. So Spanish Inquisition was one of the most deadly inquisitions in history. It was used for both political and religious reasons. So if it's basically being run by the church, why do we need to have any politics at all? Well, because the church was in power. So Spain is a nation state that was born out of religious struggle between numerous different belief systems, including Catholicism, Islam, Protestantism, and Judaism. Now, in this narrative, we don't know what the indigenous people were, what their belief system was like, if they were goddess worshippers or not. They've been written out of the history. So just characterizing it as a conflict essentially between different factions of the Abrahamic religion is, again, a case of the hero is the teller of the tale. The pagans never mounted a sufficient resistance, or at least none that we heard about. So, following the Crusades and the reconquest of Spain by the Christian Spaniards, the leader of Spain needed a way of unifying the country into a strong nation. Ferdinand and Isabella, you've heard of them, right? Chose Catholicism to unite Spain, and in 1478 asked permission of the Pope to begin the Spanish Inquisition to purify the people of Spain. Although the Inquisition originally began to purify the nation from heretics, it came to have more materialistic racial and political motives instead of just purification, whatever purification is. Because if their term for limpieza de la raza is purification of the race, wait, didn't God create all of us? What does race have to do with anything? And how do you decide that only white, purebred white Europeans are more representative of God than these people who have mixed? Okay, so they began by driving out Jews, Protestants, and other non-believers. So most often we hear about this time period from the Jews. So from the actions of the Spanish Inquisition, it was apparent it was an ethnic cleansing, as we call it today. Spanish Inquisition, its actions caused 200,000 loyal but Jewish Spaniards to leave the country. Many of our names for torture and torture devices come from this time period. Waterboarding is one that was practiced in this time period. Simulated drowning, burning you with hot irons, tongs, thumb screws. The wheel, basically they're bending you over and breaking your back on this. Torquemada, you know, the torque. You know, your car has torque, right? This comes from that. He became the Inquisitor General for most of Spain. He was responsible for establishing the rules of inquisitorial procedure and creating branches of the Inquisition in various cities. He remained the leader of the Spanish Inquisition for 15 years and believed to be responsible for the execution of around 2,000 Spaniards. Accused heretics were identified by the general population and brought before the tribunal. They were given a chance to confess their heresy against the Catholic Church and were also encouraged to indict other heretics. They admitted their wrongs and turned in other aggressors against the Church. They were either released or sentenced to a prison penalty. If they would not admit their heresy or indict others, the accused were publicly introduced in large ceremony before they were publicly killed or sentenced to a life in prison. So when we look at our jurisprudence, people could basically accuse you on no evidence at all. They could make stuff up. And you are basically considered guilty until proven innocent. Okay, so from this point of view, the assumption is you're a heretic until you're proven otherwise. And we can decide you're a heretic on no evidence at all. Our reaction to this was basically our laws, which says, okay, theoretically, you're innocent until proven guilty. And we have to have evidence, and you have the right to face your accuser. And if you don't have an attorney, we will appoint one for you. You have the right to representation. You don't have to represent yourself. In fact, generally speaking, you shouldn't represent yourself in any case, even though it is your right. So, assuming intermarriage, either voluntarily or through conquest or slavery, under Moorish conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. So, remember, during the time of the Moors, they not only built mosques, but they allowed the building of churches and synagogues. They brought in libraries, they brought in doctors, they brought in poets, they were centers of art and culture. So there's going to be intermarriage. there. Duh. Right? We ain't tripping. We're the same folks. Okay? The ethnic responses to ethnic cleansing would be either exile, we're leaving, or conversion. Those Jewish, Moorish, and Black Catholic conversos, as they were called in Spanish, were targets of the Inquisition precisely because of their ethnicity. Okay? If in Aramaic the words for good and evil are metaphorically like ripe and unripe fruit, so even if you consider a heretic an enemy, the Aramaic scriptural view is that you allow God to ripen them. Torturing them would not ripen them. Okay? So this is another reason for, even though we may be aware of in this time the Aramaic roots, we're going to ignore them. They have been excised out. So the first task of the Inquisition was inquiry, specifically inquiry into the authenticity of the conversion of the Moors and Jews who would come under the sway of those monarchs. The bloody reputation of the Spanish Inquisition, though it existed for 3 centuries, was earned in the first 15 years, even before the capture of Granada, which was the Moorish capital at the time. Okay, 2,000 persons were burned at the stake as heretics. Almost all those executed were conversos or new Christians, converts, that is, from Judaism, who were convicted of secretly practicing their former religion. So here's what was happening. They're in Christian drag, but secretly practicing Passover, their religion, in secret. Okay? But if they got caught, they were tortured. Because, your conversion to Christianity isn't real because you're converting because you fear you're going to be tortured. But there's no opportunity. But we're already assuming that you're against the religion because your skin is dark. So it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. So, original position. So, the Inquisition as a church court had no jurisdiction over Moors and Jews as such. They are not technically Christians. But once they accepted Christian baptism, they became capable of heresy in the technical sense of the word. So if you are converting because you're afraid of being tortured or killed, that's not a real conversion, so we can torture you now. Because you're basically becoming Christian for the wrong reasons. Given there are heretics being forced to become Christian under pain of death or loss of property, they're converting for the wrong reason. So this is not the practice of other branches of Christianity, notably the African and Asian churches in particular. But so we'll continue more on Wednesday. I don't. You know the corner trick?
Nazitoziva